So Parmi, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
It's great to have you on the show, Parmi. And before we walk into the future, can you please tell us a little bit about your backgrounds? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a small town in the Eastern Cape called Uitenhage. Very small town outside of Port Elizabeth, which is now Gqeberha. Quite humble beginnings. Small farm town, everybody knew each other. Very simple and basic life.
And tell us, what was your dream career when you grew up?
So this is an interesting one. I think people may be surprised because I'm such a logical and analytical person when it comes to my actual work and sort of the career that I've built over the years. But I'm also a very creative person, which I think many don't know. So I loved fashion design, for example. I used to make clothes for my Barbie dolls all the time growing up. I also had a bit of a passion for interior design. And funny enough, after I qualified as a chartered accountant, I actually did a diploma in interior design. So I just needed to scratch that itch. It was something that always piqued my interest. So even today in my spare time, you'll find me sewing something or scrapbooking or just doing something creative. For me, it's really fulfilling to just make something out of nothing almost.
So, Parmi, who inspired you in your early days?
So this was such an easy one. I mean, my dad stands out from everyone. He was such a simple, humble man, an electrician by profession, but the most smartest and hardworking individual that I've known. There was almost nothing my dad couldn't fix or problem solve. From the most basic things like fixing appliances in the house to things like helping me solve problems in university maths, despite him not having a university degree himself. My dad only had daughters, but he raised us to believe there was nothing we couldn't do. So from helping him with DIY around the house to teaching us to drive, etc., it was just that drive and support that we had as only daughters in an Indian traditional family was, I think, really shaped us. We didn't have material wealth growing up, but we had everything we needed. We had a roof over our heads, we had a warm and safe place to sleep, we had food on the table every day. But most importantly, I think we had supportive parents who really valued education. And they made whatever sacrifice was necessary to ensure that their children were educated and could live better lives than them.
Now, Parmi, today you are the CEO at the Institute of Directors in South Africa. You're one of the most prominent accounting and corporate government leaders in the country. Looking back over your career, would you say there was a turning point or maybe a number of turning points?
Maybe a number of turning points. So, I started off my career doing articles, typical CA route articles in an audit firm where you're working very long hours. It's demanding, it's challenging, but it's a great learning curve, I think. When I had done articles, I made a conscious decision to focus on having a family. And I made a conscious decision to start working half days. And I knew I was putting the brakes on my career to some extent. I knew I wasn't necessarily going to get the huge increases, the huge bonuses, or the promotions, because I was choosing to take a little bit of a step back in my career. But for me, raising is as important, and I'm as committed to being a mother as I was to being a professional in that environment. And so I really wanted to be a present and involved mum, and that was a choice I made when my children were young. I obviously stepped up and ramped up again at some point. But I think the other big turning point for me was joining the IODSA. At an audit firm, you're a very small fish in a very big pond. There's lots of and structure, there's even power struggles and all sorts of things. When I got to the IOD, I felt like I was at the forefront of governance. I was, first to be dealing with really topical governance issues in our country. I was building such strong networks in the governance and business community that I wouldn't have gotten an opportunity to do elsewhere. A smaller company also meant there's a steep learning curve in that you get involved in almost every facet of the business, right? It just gives you such a great opportunity to get your hands dirty, get involved in almost anything, try new things, be innovative. I think the platform also really allowed me to grow my profile as a thought leader, which I totally embraced. I mean, I remember times where there was just no time during the day to sit and think and write articles because I was just so busy doing my job and my responsibilities. But then I would sit on the weekend and draft articles just because I wanted to get published and I wanted to be known as a thought leader and I wanted to extend myself. And I felt that my thinking on governance could add value to someone else. So I think, from when I started to now, obviously my role has grown exponentially within the organization. And I really think the opportunities that came to me as while I was at the IODSA really shaped who I am today as a professional.
And Parmi, what would you say is driving you today? What is motivating you? What is energizing you?
I think there's a common thread in everything I do, whether it's in my own workplace that I lead, whether it's in the thought leadership I do out there publicly, or whether it's even in my home raising my teenagers, is leaving better people behind. I want to teach people the value of doing the right thing, the value of hard work, of resilience. And it's really about making that impact, not just in governance or in my, small sphere, but really shaping ethical and competent leaders of the future for our country, for South Africa.
Now, Parmi, looking into the future, and I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
So there's a couple of points I thought about. The one is really about authenticity and being purpose-driven. So you need to understand what your values are. You need to be yourself. You need to be transparent. The other is agility and adaptability. We're going to have to need to navigate complex and uncertain territory. We're going to need to have to be agile and make adjustments as we go. The future is not set in stone. Obviously, technology is going to play a big role in the future of leadership. You have to understand digital transformation and even ethical leadership in the tech-driven world, because there's many ethical considerations coming up as we consider the growth in technology. Inclusivity and diversity. Leadership, I believe, should reflect the voices of the stakeholders, the perspectives of the stakeholders, which means it should, be able to empathize with a large variety of groupings of people, etc. And then, of course, stakeholders, and we talk a lot about this in governance, right? Leadership isn't just about financial reward to the shareholder. It's really about creating long-term sustainable value for the stakeholders to make a positive impact on society.
Now, looking back over your own career, Parmi, what is it that you consider most important for building and developing future leaders?
So I think there's a couple of things that have been true for me, and it's come through even in the feedback I get from my staff when we do 360 reviews. Continuous learning is one of them. None of us are done learning. We learn every day from everyone. And even from the people who work for me, I learn things every day. Resilience, again, which I mentioned earlier. There's always going to be setbacks. There are always going to be people who are unhappy. You can't please everyone all the time. But it's about being very focused as well. Why does your organization exist? What are its objectives? You're going to have to say no sometimes. And it's about that courage, that focus and courage together to say, what is my mandate and reason for being involved here? And at what point do I need to say no? People don't like hearing the word no. I get it all the time. People have this expectation or entitlement that when they ask you to be involved in something, a project, let's say, you're automatically going to say yes because it's important to them. But I always bring myself back. Other thing, and then stay humble, you know. No task is beneath me. We did renovations at our office recently, and the staff were quite flabbergasted that I was moving furniture around and picked up the mop and started mopping the floor. But it's just that's how I am in my home. So why would I not be like that in my workplace?
Thank you. Now, Parmi, these are challenging times as the world is stumbling from one crisis to the next. What is your advice for future leaders in terms of challenges? What are some of the biggest challenges they should expect to encounter and hopefully overcome in their career?
I think, again, the uncertainty and volatility. The world is just changing so rapidly. Just when you think you're on top of what's happening in the technology space, for example, there's a whole leap in AI that we now need to come to terms with. So I think we're going to have to navigate unpredictable times. I think there are also going to be ethical dilemmas. I think there's going to be increased scrutiny on governance and transparency and leadership. We already see it in the newspapers, on social media, etc. People are watching. And that means that you're going to need to make good decisions and be able to back them up and know that your decisions are based on what's right for the organization. Balancing stakeholder interests. This is an interesting one. I mentioned earlier, we've moved from a case of in the past where business was about financial reward to shareholders to now there's a myriad of stakeholders who we as an organization need in order to operate, be it customers, employees, even society, the communities, etc. And it's about trade-offs really, because every decision you make, you're making a trade-off. You're sort of in that decision prioritizing one stakeholder over another potentially. And it's about, again, hand on heart, can you say that I've made the right decision for this organization, considering the needs and interests and expectations of the stakeholders? The other big thing in terms of challenge for me for leaders, which I'm picking up and I think is going to be more of an issue, is mental health, well-being, burnout. There's a lot of pressure on leaders. I mentioned earlier the media and social media scrutiny. It is overwhelming. People are keyboard warriors. They're very quick to type and criticize, etc., even when you're coming from a good place and just trying to do the best you can. And I think leaders are going to need to navigate that, grow a bit of a thick skin, and also focus on the well-being, not only for themselves, but also of their teams. Business is becoming increasingly competitive and difficult, to navigate.
Now, Parmi, if you were to design a curriculum for future leaders, what are one or two key skills you would want to factor in and maybe even teach?
I think very important for me is critical thinking and problem solving. It's easy to identify a problem. People often come into us with problems, and we have a thing at the IOD where we say, well, what's your suggested solution? It's about really looking at a problem critically and saying, how can I solve this problem? That's really what you want from people. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about navigating relationships with empathy, with awareness, etc., right? You can have the highest IQ, and we know this is not new news. You can have the highest IQ, but if you don't have the EQ to maintain relationships, build relationships, engage with people, keep them inspired, keep them motivated, you will not be successful. I think digital literacy is going to be a big thing as well, hey? With AI, data analysis, etc. There's no leader that can get away from keeping up with what's happening in the digital space as well.
Now, Parmi, as a mentor to many, many future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
Yeah, so one story comes to mind, and it was, interestingly enough, it was the first meeting that I had with this mentee. We were actually paired together through a mentorship program. And she had sent me her CV in advance, and there were a couple of questions she needed to answer for me in advance of us meeting, which she did. And the one thing that stood out to me when I looked through all this information is I could feel like she didn't have clear direction. I felt like she was a little bit all over the place, saying one thing here, another thing there. I didn't see a clear picture. I didn't get a clear view of who she is and what she's trying to achieve. And when at the first meeting, obviously after basic introductions and some friendly chatter, I said to her, I'm not seeing a clear picture of what you're aiming for here in your career. And you could see like light bulbs going off. She's like, oh, wow. I didn't think about that. I didn't notice that. And then I pointed it out to her with the things she had written in her form and also things in her CV. And suddenly she could see this picture wasn't necessarily making sense. I think her goals were all over the place. And I think she only realized it when I was pointing out, which also shows you that sometimes you're too close to a problem to necessarily see it. And maybe after reflecting and taking a step back and hearing from someone who's looking outside in, I think you can get that greater focus or clarity. And I saw the difference in her in the next session already, just in terms of pointing that out to her.
Thank you. Now, Parmi, are there any models of leadership that you would recommend future leaders should study and learn from?
Yeah, I think for me, authentic leadership really resonates with me. It's about being values driven. It's about being transparent, being self-aware, being yourself, having integrity, and staying true to who you are and your principles, because this really is what inspires trust. It's when your actions agree to your words, and people can see when someone is being authentic or when they're putting up a show. I think similar to when we started this interview and I said to you, I've got some notes in front of me, just so you know, I'll be looking down now. This is me being me. It's me being authentic. I wouldn't want to pretend like I'm, speaking off the cuff and haven't prepared something. I think that's important. And then, of course, coming from a corporate governance background, it's about ethical leadership. It's understanding your role, and it's about doing the right thing even when no one is looking. And can you sleep well at night, knowing the decisions you've made? And yes, there are always going to be people criticizing, thinking you didn't make the right decision. There are always going to be those people on social media, etc. But can you sleep well at night? Can you, heart on hand on heart, say, I have made the right decision for the right reasons?
Thank you. Now, Parmi, where can our listeners follow you and how can they connect with you?
So the IOD marketing team does a really great job of getting my work out there. So the IODSA social media channels is really the best place to find articles, media releases, interviews, video podcasts, etc. I'm on LinkedIn myself, so you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. The IOD also shares a number of insights via LinkedIn being one of its social media platforms. And then the IOD website itself has a lot of information, and especially my articles and media releases are all publicly available on there.
Thank you. And last but not least, Parmi, what is your message to the millions of learners out there who are looking to enter the world of work, to start a career? What are maybe one or two success principles that they should keep in mind?
I think I'm going to summarize some of the points I've made earlier. One of them is never stop learning. Leadership is a continuous journey. This weekend I attended an event and listened to a speaker, and even there were little pointers that I still remember today that I sort of picked out. And you never know who you're going to learn from and where you're going to learn from. It's sort of like so informal. When I say learning, I'm not talking about registering for a course and doing that course and ticking a box. It's informal learning in your daily interactions with people. I think that will take you far. Again, leading with integrity, being able to back up every decision you've made. Was it the right thing to do? Being adaptable. We've already said the future is so uncertain. You have to be flexible. You have to be able to adjust. If you're stuck in routines, are only able to do something this way, you're going to struggle in the future. And then, of course, empowering others. Leadership isn't just about personal success. It's also about the people who look up to you, who are inspired by you, who see a different future for them in your success. And of course, stay humble. No task is beneath a true leader. Be willing to do whatever it takes, whatever is needed to get the job done.
Parmi, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership and helping us to build better businesses and better leaders.
Thank you too. Thank you so much for inviting me.